Hi everybody, welcome to Dating for Life. My name is Brett Ullman. I know today you might be watching this in a church environment, in a school, or maybe just sitting at home with your family on a couch. No matter where you are, I'm glad you're here. Let me give you 2 minutes about me before I begin this conversation today. As I said, my name is Brett Ullman. I live in Ajax, Ontario, which is about 45 minutes east of the city of Toronto. I was a teacher for most of my life. I taught for 13 years in the inner city of Toronto before leaving that job about 5 years ago to do this. I now am blessed to be able to travel throughout Canada and the US speaking on, I just say current issues and issues that I think we've forgotten to talk about. Today we do a conversation called Dating for Life. So let's be very blunt. Why am I here? Well, I'm here for one of 3 reasons. The first is that I've had enough of hearing we've separated from my friends. I was recently at Muskoka Woods Sports Resort, and they have a byline. It says, leaders are people who look at the world and say it doesn't have to be this way. I've had enough of hearing from my friends we're over as a couple. There's nothing like being in church on a Sunday morning and having somebody walk up with a baby in their arm and say, just to let you know, so-and-so and I have separated. And I look and say, you have a 6-week-old kid in your arms. And I hear a comment like, I love her, but I'm not in love with her. I've had enough with that. Number 2, I speak on self-injury. I speak on cutting, suicide, anorexia, bulimia, and I've had enough of hearing about people who are self-injuring due to parents being divorced. Of my 5,000 emails on self-injury, most of them dealing with cutting, half of them always come back to the day my parents got separated. And lastly, number 3, it's become a real holy discontent for me. Bill Hybels, who's out of a church called Willow Creek in Chicago, has a book called Holy Discontent. It's basically this: what bugs you? What bugs you in life? And for me, this has become one of those issues that just bugs me. Now, I have a few different talks, and in all my talks, I've always tried to get to the root issue of what's going on. So in my main talk called Media, Faith, and Culture, we look at what's in media, but the root issue is, how is your worldview? If we have a biblical worldview, we'll have biblical values. If you have biblical values, you'll have biblical actions. So the root issue of media was worldview. Root issue of self-injury was dealing with your histories and dealing with your stories. Why are you self-injuring? It's because of those histories and stories. So I thought to myself, what's the root issue of divorce? I spent a bit of time trying to figure this out, and then I thought to myself, well, of course, it's pre-marriage. If you have bad pre-marriage counseling, you'll therefore maybe have a bad marriage. So I left with thinking about that and bought every pre-marriage counseling package I could find in the world. Stacks of these things came, and I began to design the best, as I said, smoking pre-marriage counseling package you could ever imagine. I remember a night, though, I'm sitting working, it's about 9 o'clock at night, and do you ever have those, like the light bulb goes off, and I said to myself, I put my hands in my face, and I said, I'm wrong. And I literally took all those things and put them in the recycling bin. And I actually said to myself this. I said, pre-marriage counseling is an unbelievable, absolute waste of time. It's a waste of time if you've chosen the wrong person. And I realized that I need to go not just back to where people are getting pre-marriage counseling, but I need to go all the way back to when people are dating. So I designed a talk for dating, and I did it the very first time up at a camp, and I designed the talk for college-age students, and I thought that's the age I should be talking to, and in the audience was a girl in grade 4, and she came up to me afterwards and said, Brett, I will never date the same way again. And I once again had one of those moments thinking, I think this is a lot bigger than what I was actually thinking about. And so I realized that this is a talk on dating for people of any age. In a disposable world, how do we not create disposable marriages? We live in a world today where we throw out everything. If you're like me, your jeans get frayed right above the knee. I have stacks of jeans at home that I just can't wear anymore once the hole gets too big. We say we'll wear them when we paint, and then we never wear them ever again. Everything we have, we usually throw out. Even if you have an iPod, we all have them, iPods, iPhones. What happens is they break, and it's cheaper for us to buy a new one than it is to get them fixed. Today, what I watch is we actually throw away our marriages, we throw away our engagements, and more I'm watching people throw away their relationships, whether in elementary, secondary, or beyond in college and university. So as we begin, I got 4 assumptions I want to go through. 4 things, kind of the ground rules or things I just assume you're on the same page that I am. First and foremost, I assume that you're old enough to find the opposite sex attractive. If you're sitting down and you're still kind of, I'm a guy, I don't really want to hang out with girls, you're a little too young. For the most part, though, you get this. My son is 6, and last year he came back in grade 1. One day he was a little teary after school. I said, Ben, what's wrong? And he said, Dad, I broke up with my girlfriend today. As a father of a 5-year-old, I looked at him, I said, dude, who's your girlfriend? And he said, I don't remember her name. And that was the end of the conversation. But I realized that we start the dating conversation very young, and his dating was a lot different than real dating. So A, do you find the opposite sex attractive? B, I assume you don't want to get married today. You're not sitting there in class or in your youth room saying, tonight I want to get married. If I can just get through this talk, then we can do that. I assume you don't want to get married today, tonight, tomorrow, next month, next year, or for many of you, not for many years. But I'd ask the question, no matter where you are, who's willing to raise your hand and say this? One day I see myself getting married. When I ask this, it's at least 90% of every room will put up their hand. And the truth is, it's most of us. Most of us will say that one day in life we will get married. It just isn't today. Number 3, I assume you care. When I do a talk on dating, it is the largest talk that I do. People come out for this talk, and I guess I would say sexuality as well, but dating is something everyone is dealing with. And when I do these at events across Canada and in the United States, they pack out everywhere I go. Number 4, I'm going to make an assumption that you would agree with me that the extremes in dating are just downright stupid. Whether we call it hooking up, sex on the first date, friends with benefits, F-buddies, call it whatever you want. The idea of I can sleep with someone anytime, any place with no restrictions and everything is fine is just not okay. That's hurtful and damaging, and for the most part, we can't even begin to talk about how that will affect you later on in life. Other side of the coin is what I hear so often in the church world. It's the idea of, oh, I'm not going to date. And I'll say to someone, do you mean until you're 16, until you're 18? And someone will always say, oh no, I'm not going to date. God will send me someone. And I usually kind of laugh and say, really? You believe that? Like one day you'll be at home and, hi, God sent me, I'm your boyfriend. That doesn't happen. That's not real, and that won't happen in your life. We have these extremes. The question is, how do we find what's actually in the middle? So I ask you a very simple question. What is your plan in dating? There's no question I ask that kind of people look at me and say, what did you say? And I'm like, what is your plan in dating? And the answers are kind of weird. Some people say fun. One person said movies. I say, your plan in dating is movies. And they said yes, and I really don't understand that. But what is the plan? Because you got to have one. There's a timeline in dating as well. If we look at kind of different areas of life, we would begin with elementary school, moving into high school, and then high school moves into college or university or the workplace, and then that moves into kind of the times of being married. From elementary school all the way up. My daughter one day gets off the bus. She was in, I think, senior kindergarten. She says to me, this guy's name. She says, Daddy, do you know him from school? And I said, yeah, I do. And she says to me, he's hot. As a father, you cringe and I look to the ground as we're walking back from the bus and I'm holding her hand and I think I kind of keeled over a bit and she says, Daddy, and I'm like, yeah. And she says, what does hot mean? And I remember bursting out laughing, realizing I love you a little more at this moment. But the truth is that dating begins at very young ages. But if we look at all the way through that, my little young girl at that age, all the way through to grade 11, we realize this, dating doesn't matter. Statistically, if you're watching this and you're a parent, if you're over about the age of 25, many of you did meet in elementary school. Many of you met in high school. The truth is today that probably won't happen. I rarely meet any couples as I travel. And I travel to 50, 60, 70 plus thousand people a year. I rarely meet anyone in their early 20s getting married who ever married the person they began to date in elementary school or in high school all the way up to grade 11. I read one statistic that said grade 12, you have a 10% chance of meeting your spouse. So I kind of say the question of what is the purpose in dating when you're up to grade 11? So who's this talk good for? It's good for you if you're in junior high. It's good for you if you're in high school, if you're a 20-something, or for anyone who lives in relationship. And let's be honest, we all live in relationship. Now, in Canada and in the US, our statistics of divorce are pretty high. We talk about stats in the 45% to 55% range. Let me just pause for 1 second. Anytime I use stats today, I want you to understand this. Statistics are just a bent, meaning if the stat is in this direction, it's probably in that direction. Meaning, I don't care if the stat says 50, it might be 45, it might be 55, but it's not 5. And it's not going to be 80. Too often today we argue statistics and we end up in a really dumb fight over something that doesn't matter. But a statistic is a snapshot in one place in time of that particular audience. So it's not always perfect. But the stat that bothers me is this. It's not that whether it's 45 or 50% of couples get divorced. They now say it's only 25% of couples are actually successful. They say after 10 years of marriage, only 25% of couples would say that they're not only intact together, but they're also happy. And that's a huge one. We're now looking at not a 50% failure rate, we're looking at a 75% failure rate. In today's society, divorce is playing a part in everyone's life. It's become the solution to a problem that could have been resolved long before. Divorce is not, in almost all cases, the result of a bad marriage. It's the punishment for not preparing before the marriage took place. Every year in Canada, 70,000 couples split up. If you come from a divorced background, let that sink in. 70,000 families just like you are torn apart. That's 192 every single day. All in all, it's roughly 4 out of 10 to 5 out of 10 couples. And the new stat that's really bothering me is this. It's that 200,000 couples every year are getting divorced before their second wedding anniversary. Second, we used to call something the 7-year itch, where after being 7 years of being married, you'd kind of say we've been together for a long time. Now we're talking 2 and out. This is a problem. And I think that there's no one would be watching this who'd say divorce isn't affecting you in some way, shape, and form. So I thought, well, what is marriage? I went on the Webster's online dictionary, and it says that marriage is the institution whereby individuals are joined in marriage. Like, whatever. We know that, right? It's an intimate or close union, and I'm like, okay. So I read an online article, basically, and a guy named Harville Hendricks says this, that marriage ultimately is the practice of becoming passionate friends. I like that. For me, when I got married, it was me saying, I'm only going to be with this woman, Dawn, my wife, and I was not going to be with anybody else. Then I Googled dating, and the Webster's Dictionary calls it says this, to go out on. And then it says in brackets, usually romantic dates, which kind of terrifies me. Like, I want to know if I'm going out, if it is a date or if it's not a date. But the reality is, to go out on, there are many ways we go out on. If you look at how we used to date and how we date today, there's a big divide. I'm 39 years old. I'm almost 40. The way I dated is not how you, who is 15, dates or will date later in life. You know, what we used to have would be a couple of these ideas. One would be regular dating. Now, the truth is, regular dating is still the same. Regular dating, if you're 15, is you go up to a girl and say, hey, do you want to go see a movie with me? And she says, okay. And you go, well, can your mom pick us up at 7? Because you don't drive, right? You need to get to the theater. That's kind of regular dating. Double dating. Now, let me just say this. Double dating is the lie you're going to tell your mom and dad because your mom and dad want you to go out with another couple. Now, just realize this. My generation invented that lie. It means that you and another couple come together, you go out to a movie, but you go to 2 movies or 2 restaurants or 2 places for the night. You come back together, drive home together, and your parents go, oh, everything's good. Just realize that we invented that, so your parents will probably know it. Number 3 is group dating. I don't get this. It's not, 15 of you all going to a movie and parents go, oh, it's a group date. It's not. It's a bunch of people going to a movie. Group dating is kind of weird. Blind dating. Blind dating is terrifying. I hope you never, ever have to go on a blind date. I was doing a phys ed degree at University of Toronto, and I went on a blind date. So I went down to a Starbucks in downtown Toronto. As I got in, I realized I don't know what she looks like. We had not talked about that. She knew that I'm 6'6" and I'm a bigger guy. I knew nothing about her. So as I got in, I sat down, and every woman who walked in, I would look at them, and they'd look over at me, and I'd look at them again. You know that weird thing? Actually, she stood me up. So for an hour and a half, I eyed every woman who walked into Starbucks, and I was that creep who looked at every single girl coming in. It was horrible. I hope you don't ever have to do that. Then we have what's called long-distance dating. Usually we just call it holidating. It's the idea of you are here and your boyfriend or girlfriend is here and there's a lot of distance in between you. I'm speaking at MUN, Memorial University of Newfoundland, a few years ago, and a girl comes up to me and she's laughing and she says, Brett, me and my boyfriend, we holidate. I said, oh, what do you mean? She goes, well, I'm at MUN. And I said, yeah. And she said, my boyfriend is in Vancouver. And I laughed. I'm thinking, like, you can't really get to 2 extremes in Canada other than St. John's and Vancouver. And I said, well, when do you see each other? And she says, well, during reading week. If you're in high school, it's like your March break. And I said, okay, that's 1 week a year. What about the summertime? And she said, you know what? He actually plants trees in the Yukon all summer. And I said, how many weeks have you guys spent together? And she said 4. And I said, over 4 years? And she said, yeah. And I thought to myself, I spend more time with people I don't even like. Like 1 week a year is not a relationship. Then you move on to things, like those would be more things that my generation did. Not saying that like this generation doesn't do that, but more of my generation would spend time dating in those ways. New ways, online dating. 1 out of 5 couples who married last year, 1 out of 5 met online. eHarmony.com, the website, says that 1 in 10 marriages happen from then. Now, online dating is a new thing, but something that has been around for a while. I met my wife on an online date. Now, I'm going to be honest, I've never been on an online date. She was actually on an online date with another guy. And he went to the bathroom and I found her cute, so I went over and said hi, and the long story being short is we were married 11 months later. You know, the truth is it's all fair in love and war. So he left, I moved in, and we've been together for 13 years since then. Speed dating. Speed dating is brilliant. If you're from the Toronto area, the Toronto Blue Jays haven't done too well in the last few years, so the 500 levels are pretty empty, the top rows of the seats, and they've had some speed dating going on in there. Speed dating is basically this. You get a chance to sit down with someone for a short period of time. Maybe it's the top or the bottom of an inning of baseball. And you ask a few questions, and then quickly it changes and you get to spend time with someone else. Now, at the end of the night, what you'd say is yes or no. If you sit down with me and you think you'd like another date or coffee, you would tick yes. And if I say the same to you, yes, if we both say yes, we both get sent each other's emails. That's it. It takes months, if not years of dating and packs it together in one night. I remember multiple dates where I'd be driving, drive to someone's house and I pick up a girl, and as I'm walking to the car, I've actually said to myself, never again. Just in that few minutes of meeting parents and coming out to the car, there's been something that was a big issue for me and one of those deal breakers, and I knew we'd never be together again. Problem is that I still had to go through dinner and a movie and all that kind of conversation. Mobile dating. Mobile dating is a little weird. It's like taking your iPhones or other things and basically you walk into an environment and it will say, oh, there's a girl here named Jennifer and she likes, who cares? It's a Facebook. It's basically what it is. It's like seeing someone's Facebook account. Virtual dating is just downright dumb. If you've ever been to the website Second Life, you basically create an avatar, not like James Cameron's movie, but a little animated character. And what virtual dating is, you create a character and they create a character in Second Life, and your characters go flying around the world and go on a date. I read a court case in the United States where an avatar married another avatar, and they were married by a pastor avatar. And the question is, are they legally married? And I'd be like, I just don't care. It doesn't really matter to me. But what a weird discussion on dating it is. And the last one would be singles events. And I'd say this, singles events are tough. It's tough because you have people of all ages and all stages put together in one different place. Now, dating is actually more interesting today because of how dating progresses. It used to be like I met my wife and we got to know each other and kind of progressed that way. Here's kind of the new progression today. Maybe after today, after this presentation, you meet someone. And what happens is you meet them and then you become tonight Facebook friends. And then after you become Facebook friends, you become Facebook stalkers, right? You go through all their articles, all their info, all their pictures. And then maybe you poke them. And if you really like them, maybe you super poke them. Then you make them one of your top friends on Facebook. Then as your relationship progresses, maybe you Facebook chat, maybe you instant message each other, maybe you text back and forth. If you're lucky to have iPhone 4s, you guys, FaceTime together. Maybe then you actually chat on the phone, and by that time, you've never actually been out together, but the relationship changes from single to complicated to in a relationship, and you realize suddenly you're dating, and you've never been on a date. And I hear that all the time now, of that's how relationships are moving along. And I don't really understand that. If I was single today, what would I use? I would use any of these. Because choosing the right person is one of the biggest decisions you will ever make in your entire life. What influences you on dating? I'm talking about movies, music, TV, friends, family, books, etc. Movies are huge. What does dating look like in movies? Dating in movies is usually sex. There isn't a lot of dating conversation. It's people meet and they're together and they quickly are together in bed. If I can just give a quick suggestion, there are a few movies I hope you never, ever take dating advice from. First and foremost, a High School Musical. Please do not believe that you'll be at school tomorrow and suddenly after you've gotten your fries in the cafeteria, some guy will begin to dance on over to you. Everyone will join in and you will get together and kiss in the middle. Like, that doesn't happen. That's not real. It's movies. It's like Camp Rock 1 and 2. And Twilight. Guys, I've never seen a movie in my life where a guy stares at a girl with his mouth open for huge chunks of the movie. Guys, if you stare at a girl with your mouth open, you are a weird kind of freakish guy. We don't do that. That's just weird. Just please don't. You know, music's a big thing. What do you listen to? What influences you in music? But I would just say this. If any of you take dating advice from guys like Lil Wayne, I got issues. And I'm not saying anything about Lil Wayne, I'm talking about his music. So if he says that women are good for nothing but sex, and you believe that that is what you're going to implement into your dating life, I got some concerns. What about other artists? I don't have to name them all off. I mean, go to billboard.com and check out the top 100 artists, or how about just what are you listening to now on your iPhone, your MP3 player? What influence is that music having on how you date? How about the next category, friends? You know, your friends are very influential in your life. I'm at a retreat once and I'm speaking and I said to the girl in the front row, I said, where do you get your dating influence from? And she says, oh, from that guy. So I turned to that guy. I said, where do you get your dating influences from? And that guy actually says, from this girl. I'm thinking this is going to go on for a long time. And the girl says, oh, I get all my dating influences. And she said, you know what, Brett, I've seen every episode of the OC. And I watched these two people kind of turn and look at this girl. And she said, oh yeah, really, I've seen all the episodes. And the guy says, all the advice you gave? And she says, yeah, from the OC. You know, you should know where your friends are getting advice from, because I realize you probably don't want anything advice-wise coming from the OC or Jersey Shore or anywhere else. Dating influences from your family. MTV did a large study recently on who's the most influential person in your life. I expected Kanye, Jay-Z, Drake, you know, artists that are out today. You know what it was? Mom and dad. It blew my mind. The number one thing by far was parents. Your parents are still influential in your life. And the reality is today you might have differences in what you feel and believe, but the reality is if you trust your parents right now, ask them. Ask them what they think about the person you're dating. How about books? I mean, the truth is today, most of us don't read much. I challenge you to have a book with you everywhere you go. Always have a book. I got a book in my bag with me, and if I have extra time today, I will always have it out and be reading. But read books on dating. Now, some of them are good, some of them are brutal. And I'd say this, chew the meat, spit out the bones. Take the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff. But I would say if dating is such a big thing in your life, which it is, make sure that you're reading everything you can find on that. I'd also say, who are your role models? And I'd say this includes singers, actors, actresses, athletes, you name it. You know, does it matter to you how they date? You know, someone like a Rihanna or other singers are good singers. They're a role model if you're a singer. But how they date doesn't really matter. From an athlete's perspective, someone like a Tiger Woods is my role model for golf. Now, before anyone starts laughing, as I mentioned Tiger Woods, can I just say this, that we as the church are one of the most critical people and bodies in the entire world. As opposed to criticizing Tiger Woods for everything that's happened, how about we pray for him? My point is this, that Tiger Woods is my role model, not in dating and not in marriage and life, but he's my role model for a golfer. He's still an amazing world-class golfer. I've been working through a chart for the last few years. It's the idea of kind of the progression of friendships. We begin with what I just say is don't know. Don't know is you don't know someone. You might be sitting here tonight at a school and you look across and, you know, I don't know that person. Or maybe you're at a church or youth group somewhere. Don't know becomes, and then when you know someone, they become an acquaintance. Acquaintance means you've said hi, you might even be Facebook friends, you don't know anything really about them, you're just an acquaintance. Then you go through two categories. One I call school friends and one I call friends. Now, what's the difference? Now, a school friend is someone you spend most of your life with. You as someone in like high school, a teenager, will spend more time with those school friends than anyone else in your life, including your own family. They're good friends, they're real friends. But what's the difference between a school friend and a friend? Well, once the summer comes, a real friend is a person you talk to ongoing. Whereas a school friend is someone, when you come back in September, you say, how was your summer? Because you don't know. Both are good friends. Then at the point of friends, they become what's called your inner circle. Now, guys and girls are different with this. I find women, you guys by grade 11 get this. It is that core group of people around you that you trust with anything in your life. Even me as an adult, I've realized, and guys learn this later, I learned this by my late 20s, that I need that group of people around me. I have friends and family and people I trust with everything. I trust with my car, my home, my children, my wife. I trust with my life. Hey, they're my friends and I'm willing to offer what's needed to help, and they're willing to help me as well. Now, here's what happens. You continue down this progression, and at some point you cross a line. And once you cross this line, this fine line, you can't go back. That's when you leave being a friend or an inner circle person and you become a boyfriend or girlfriend. And the progression goes boyfriend and girlfriend down to husband and wife. Problem being, if you're in grade 10, it's not going to happen. So what happens is you're together for 12, 16, 18 months, and then you leave and become part of a new category in life, which we usually just call people we hate. And we can laugh at that, but it's true, right? When you break up with someone, you're not really friends anymore. You don't really talk anymore, and throughout life, you just will lose touch. And I'd say if you can't move forward the progression to being married, then why would you take someone who you are a friend with and cross a line that you know will take you down a road that will probably end up in you breaking up? Because your relationship will never be the same again. And I'd say, what is your plan in dating? And you can look at a long road where you go off in the distance, which is a plan of the future. But if you begin dating someone knowing that you will never be with them forever, your long road ends with a tornado. And many people, you'd all agree with me that you've seen a bad breakup. You've seen a couple be together, be good, begin to fall apart, and then I've watched it split entire youth groups and entire parts of schools as a couple splits apart, and some people side with the girl, some people side with the guy. But what's your plan? Because I think that's a weird plan. I would say this, make no apologies. Don't ever apologize, though, for wanting intimate relationships. Now, intimacy is not sex. We're talking the idea of wanting people to know who you are. In the book Larry Crabb wrote called The Marriage Builder, he says people everywhere long for intimate relationships. He says we all need to be close to someone. Make no apologies for your strong desire to be intimate with someone. It's neither sinful nor selfish. Now, I will say this. Please remember, people don't complete you. The lie in a movie, you complete me, is a lie. It's just not true. If you are broken walking into a relationship, you will be broken in that relationship. People will not complete who you are. Now, let's go through the verse that we butcher over and over again in dating conversation. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14. It says, don't be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteous and wickedness have in common, or what fellowship can light have with darkness? That's from the NIV. If you look at the Message, it says, don't become partners with those who reject God. First off, I polled a few youth groups and I asked, what do you think yoked means? 25% of the youth group says it has something to do with eggs, which means this verse says, don't be egged together with unbelievers, which makes no sense at all. First off, yoked means to be put together. If you're looking in biblical times, this verse is a throwback to Deuteronomy 22, verse 10, which says, don't plow with a donkey and an ox together. It's cruel to both. Being yoked together means literally to be tied together with leathers as a farmer would tie his animals and then pull some kind of farming utensil behind. And picture a huge, huge ox and a small, small donkey. It just doesn't work. You're like, Brett, I'm not a farmer. I have no idea what you're talking about. Take the Olympic day you have at school in the spring. Picture me, I'm 6'6", and the smallest person in your youth group today, and tie one of our legs together and then make us run across the field. It would be funny. Of course it would. Because one person's dragging one up, one person's dragging the other down. Basically, though, we need to realize that they're going in two different directions. Now, just before I move on, this verse also sounds very negative. It's very much Christian good, secular bad, which I don't like. Please realize, though, that when Paul wrote this 2,000 years ago, there was a clear divide between those who knew Christ and those who didn't. Christian and pagan, which is why this verse is where it is, which is why this verse says what it does fairly harshly. Today, though, 2,000 years later, there are many, if not most people I find in society have adopted Judeo-Christian values, meaning they might not know Jesus, but they're good people. They're your neighbors, they're your friends, the people whose lockers are beside you, and they're good people. They just don't know God, but they still believe in love and marriage and trust and honor and all those things. I guess the point is this. If you're going in this direction and someone else is going in that direction, what do you have in common? One person yelled out, because the picture is goldfish, they said, you're both goldfish. And I'm like, well, other than being goldfish, what do you have in common? If you are a follower of the way, it's the earliest term used for the word Christian, I hope certain things would matter to you from a faith perspective. A would be going to church. Ladies, they say now 1 in 5 of you, when you get married, what will happen is you will end up going to church alone. And the question is this, are you overlooking what the man is saying, or men, are we being deceitful? And I got to think, honestly, in my mind, that we as men are a little deceitful with that. We're willing to say we're a Christian because we want to marry you. And in the end, we just then don't go to church. But if you can't go to church together, you don't share that. How about youth group? I grew up in youth groups. I think youth groups are a great place to find identity and to work through those hard conversations of faith. But if you don't share youth group, then you don't share that. How about small groups? I think small groups are where church is done. The big church is the celebration, but small groups are where life is done together. If your husband or wife doesn't want to be part of that, you don't share that. Missions. I think missions is what drew my wife and I together. My wife and I both traveled extensively around the world on humanitarian missions projects. Now, here's the difference. At this moment, in places like Haiti and in many other places around the world, there are tens of thousands of good people doing good work. The difference is when I did missions, I did always missions in the name of Jesus. And today these people are doing good work in the name of good work. But if you don't share that with missions, or the exact same would be working with the poor, I did it once again in the name of God. How about giving dollars to organizations? I know a lot of couples who get married and then one person says, I'd like to give money to the church or to this camp or to this organization. And the person says, why would I ever give money to the church? And how about big ones like prayer or reading the Bible? If you don't share any of these things, then I ask the question about, does your faith actually matter to you? There's only a few spheres we have in life. You have your faith, you might have how you connect intellectually, and you might have how you connect sexually. And the reality is, if a big sphere of your life, faith, is one you don't share, then I'd say, is really faith something? Is that really something that matters to you in life? Missionary dating. We call this flirt and convert. It's the idea of that you will begin to date someone, and because of you, they will then become a Christian and meet Christ. It's an incredibly egocentric view of the world, of that I will make them meet Christ. It takes God and the Holy Spirit completely out of this conversation. Now, does it work? Sometimes. I have some family and good friends who've met someone and they become a Christian through them, but most of the time, it doesn't. And what I find is you've left that fully devoted follower of Christ and you become the lukewarm Christian. And maybe they become someone who hates church to someone who goes to church twice a year. And I'd say, is that really what you're looking for? All right, let's address the one. The idea in romantic movies that there is one person in the world for you, and if you don't meet that person on that specific day, you never will. Gwyneth Paltrow had an old movie called Sliding Doors. It was kind of the idea of one day, in one of her things that she was doing, she caught the subway, and in one day the subway door closed. And there were two different parallel lives that went off from that moment. I don't believe in the one. I believe in love, and I love my wife, but I don't believe in the one idea. It's weird when you think about the one. I often have people who will give me a letter. People I know who'll say to me, Brett, I'm single, I'm this age. When you're traveling, could you look for someone for me who has these kinds of things? And I had one person say to me once, Brett, I'd like this person. They are going to be tall, dark, and handsome. I kind of said, really? Like that's what you're looking for in a guy, tall, dark, and handsome? And the person said, yeah, and they must like missions. And I said, oh, this is you. And she said, oh no, this is what I'm looking for. I said, well, honey, this is actually you, but it's just a guy. It's kind of like the idea of me, Brett, that I want to date someone who's just like me, a 6'6" girl named Brettina, who's the exact same in everything. You don't want to date you. This girl said, oh no, I do. And I said, honey, no disrespect, but you don't want to date you. You don't want to date yourself. I mean, I'm a phys ed major. I love sports. My wife is a nurse who hates sports. Who cares? When you begin to package the little person into this little box, you will lose out on people who are amazing for you. What I love about my wife are not the things that we are similar on. They're the things that we are different on. Don't sell yourself short because you believe in some romantic ideology of the one. There's an old Cameroon proverb that says this: he who asks the questions cannot avoid the answers. There are tough questions in dating. I believe we don't talk about these questions. Now, you can deal with them now while you're dating, or you can deal with them in a few years when you're married with a 2-year-old kid. Which one's easier? Which one's easier to make changes with, now or then? And I would say now. We're going to deal with 3 big conversations and 7 tiny conversations. There's a guy named Otto. Otto says this, that the fool learns from his own mistakes. I would rather learn from the mistakes of others. Let's look at the questions that people didn't ask and begin to look at how we can begin to implement these in our life. First section is communication. The first of the big 3 things is on communication. And now, what is communication? Communication is talking. They say 80% of all problems in relationships, in marriage, and everything are from this communication. I read an article once that made me laugh. It said that the major issue for most men is that we never realize that we've married not another man, but a woman for quite a long period of time. You know, my wife and I got married, and I moved into our house first for a month before we got married, and I set up the real stuff. I set up the technology, the computers, the television. I didn't even have a kitchen table. I didn't care, but the TV worked and the internet worked. My wife came in and started putting like flower pots and potpourri and candles around the house, and I remember feeling a little angry, like, this is my place, until I realized, no, it's not. It's interesting realizing that I'm marrying a woman, and a woman is different than a dude. It does take 2 to tango. What does 2 to tango mean? It means that it's not about you. It's great that you find someone attractive. It's great that you found someone who's a Christian. It's great that you found someone who is funny and you like what they're going to do in life and you guys get along. Here's the big question though. Do they like you back? That's when you come from being basically a boyfriend or girlfriend and you become what you don't want to be, which is a stalker. And the truth is you don't want to be that. When dialogue stops, love dies and resentment and hatred are born. How has dialogue with your friends and family changed since you began dating? If you respected your brothers and sisters, your friends around you, and your mom and dad, and you begin to date someone else, listen to what they say. When they say to you, you know what, this guy isn't good for you, or this girl, there's just something not right with this, listen to them. They're going to be the people who will be there when you break up. And I'd say too, with communication, sometimes we just don't have it. If you're getting sexually involved together because you have nothing else to say, that's not okay. Are they your friend? If you just fool around and do nothing else, that's not good enough. There must be communication between you if you're going to be together forever, which is the goal. Section number 2, money. I don't know of any other place that becomes more frustrating in life than trying to deal with money and then trying to bring 2 people together to become that one and then live together. Dealing with money is a big deal. I'd ask, what are your future financial goals? And people kind of say, what do you mean by that? What is your future financial goal? Do you want to just get by? We have a problem today, guys, it's us. It's the idea of the new college man and the college man and kind of beyond that. It's the idea of a 28-year-old guy who lives in his parents' basement who works 10 hours a week at Starbucks and plays Halo and Call of Duty most of his day. That's not just a joke. This is what I hear from college students everywhere I travel. Like, guys, if you ask a girl out and say, hey, want to come watch me play COD? That's not a date. Women do not want that in a guy. Most college-age girls today say they cannot find a single guy to date. That's a problem. Anyways, the idea of just getting by should not and is not okay. Number 2, maybe you want to have a bit of extra spending money. Maybe you want to be independent. Maybe you want to move out and go on your own. Maybe you want to be wealthy. Remember, it's the love of money that's wrong. I know many people who are very affluent, and in times of crisis, whether it be a church or a missions organization overseas, they step in because they're able to with the financial backing. And I know many people who are incredibly generous with the money that they give to those things. So you put yourself in one of those categories. Most of you will say being independent. Everyone wants to be wealthy, but most of you would say, I want to be independent. I want to live on my own, away from my parents. I want to have a place and get married and live on my own. Then I'd say, well, great. How are you going to actually achieve that? The teacher in me would say this, it's great to say that, but how will you actually do it? By you not doing your homework tonight or tomorrow night, it will affect the rest of your life. If you graduate with a 40% average in grade 12, you're not going to any college or any university, any apprenticeship or any program in this country. Some of you, just by playing video games, just by playing Farmville for the 500th time on Facebook, you're going to end up missing out on what you actually need to be doing. You're never going to be 25 and look back and say, I know I failed out of school, but man, my farm was awesome on Farmville. Like, no one cares about that. You'll never look back to how good you did on WoW or RuneScape or Guild Wars, ever. Money to me can be very simplified. And for some of you, this might not be a big thing for you because you're only in high school. But for some of you who are a bit older, I think there's three buckets. The first bucket is things that we have to put money into. Rent or a mortgage if you bought a house, a car, a phone. I'm not saying you need some iPhone or the biggest new phone that's out. Food, utilities, meaning when you're on your own, you'll pay for things like gas and water and electrical. Clothing, tithing, giving to the church, and I put offerings in that too. The reality is those are they're must-dos in life. You have to put those things in. All right. Bucket number two, I just call this add to. It's the things that if we're able to fill the first bucket, we then have the money to put into the second bucket. They're things like RSPs, RESPs, and even just savings for life. So it's saving for your future, for kids' future, and for anything else you need. Bucket three is kind of what we usually think is what we need. This includes things like mobile phones, your high-speed internet, your cable at home, and for the most part, I find many of us have these packages with companies, whether it be Rogers or Bell or Shaw or whoever, but hundreds and hundreds of dollars of packages going into these things, and we don't have the money to pay for the first few buckets. I think money is one of those things we got to talk about. And for a guy, there's a big question that I think is a deal breaker. The question is this: how do you feel about your wife working after you guys have kids? Now, I've seen a huge change in the last few years of many, many women staying home, whereas before, as many women going out of the house and working. I'm not saying one's wrong and one's not. I do think we need to, as parents, raise children. My wife worked part-time for many years, and she was home first for a few years and then part-time, and my wife still works part-time right now. But this is a deal breaker because, guys, you need to talk about this with the girl you're dating. I've heard many couples who get married, and then the question comes up of after they have kids, well, honey, you're staying home. One of my friends married a surgeon, and he said to his wife at the time, well, honey, you'll probably stay home with the kids. And he looked at her and said, she looked back at him and said, honey, I'm a surgeon. Like, I'm not staying home. I'm a doctor. I will be working. And they were both kind of, they couldn't believe that they'd never talked about this before. That's a deal breaker. What I want to walk through now are questions. And just so you know, every question we talk about here is going to be listed, and I'll tell you where it's listed online. I'm going to give you the PDF you can do later. These are the questions that I want you to think about because I think, for the most part, we think dating is small. And I want you to realize that dating is a lot bigger. So some of the questions would be things like these. What kind of debt do you presently have? I talked to a girl in grade 12 who had $40,000 of credit card debt. She had credit card after credit card after credit card. How about things like what problems do you see in your partner and how they deal with money presently? How about this? Do you tithe? Do you give money to the church? And then great, well, who do you give it to? What church or what place? Do you also give any offerings? I mean, the Bible talks about tithes and offerings. Tithes are giving your best to God, and then offerings are when you feel led. Do you have money to do that? How about who will pay the bills? I'm doing a talk like this on dating, and down the middle of the aisle come a guy and a girl. And they're talking about getting married. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, and we were talking about money. And I said, well, who's going to pay the bills? And she says, well, I'm not really good with money. And he says, well, I'm not really good with money either. And they pause. And I look at them and I said, no, who of you is going to do the bills? And again, they both went, we're not really good with money. And I'm like, who's going to pay the bills? Like, one of you has to grow up and pay the bills. You can't get married and play house. Like, you'll go bankrupt within a month. Someone's paying for the cable. Someone's paying for the gas. Someone's paying for stuff. One of you has to do these kinds of things. How about, do you pay credit cards off at the end of every month? I would never marry anyone who doesn't pay off their credit cards at the end of every month. Now, you might be okay with that. And that's okay. But you need to marry someone who you and them agree on how you're going to spend money. How about, are you open about money in your relationship? Are you hiding money? Are you hiding debt? You need to be, bringing those things out into the open. Are you going to pool your money or lead separate financial lives? When you get married, will you have two different bank accounts or will you have one? What they do say is if you're not willing to have one bank account, you're not all in. You're kind of like preparing to split up even though you're coming together. Do you want a large wedding? I know we all love to have good weddings, especially for a lot of the young women who I know. The wedding is a very, very important day. Not that it's not for men, but usually it's more for the woman. But do you want to have a large wedding or do you want to have a down payment to go have a home? What questions do you have about money after this discussion? Dating grows. Now, sex. There is no conversation that I do that brings more frustration, anger, confusion than sex. Now, I'm gonna be real honest. If I asked you, how do you presently feel about this topic, I would get two different answers, because I'd have to ask it two different ways. First, I would ask you as a group, how do you all feel about sex? And I would get, for the most part, people saying, good, ready to go, everything's good. If I instead, though, came to you and said, individually, one-on-one, how do you feel about sex? How do you feel about sexuality? I would get, across the board, almost every single person saying the same thing. I don't know. I think I know. I've seen this movie, I've seen that show, I've seen this on the internet, I've read this in a magazine, and a lot of people even say to me, Brett, I've actually had sex. But they still say, I just don't know. Sex is not like it is in the movies. And the reality is, sex is a conversation we have to talk about. People get married when? Here's the first thing that's kind of changed sexuality. If I was to ask you, when did you get married in biblical times? People would start shouting out answers. If I said, in Bible times, what was the age? Someone shouts out, usually 12 and a half to 14, which is the range. And I'm like, that's great, we know that. The problem today is that that's not when you get married in Canada. Canadian statistics, if you're a guy, you'll get married when you're average 34. The average woman is 32. Well, we're not at 12 anymore. We're now adding 20 years to that. Now, am I saying that if I got married when I was younger, I wouldn't have struggled sexually? And you know what? For a lot of it, I'm going to say yeah. I spent many years dating and in relationships. And remember this, sex is a good thing. Sex isn't a bad thing. We cannot preach sex as bad. Read Song of Solomon. Sex is a good thing, but it's designed for a context. And the problem is now we're waiting longer and longer and longer to express love in a way that God wants us to. How about the 1950s? In the 1950s, we hit the average age of 20, and then we were actually in the early 2000s, we were at the average age of 25. So you can see how we've kind of come forward over the years to where we sit today. The second thing that's an issue is school. If you lived 100 years ago, about 100 years ago, roughly, most of you, after grade 8, you were an adult. If we all understand the new teenage phenomenon, it's a fairly new one. It's only been around in the last little while. It began in the whether it's 40s, 50s, or 60s, we can argue that, but it was designed as a marketing thing so that we could then sell you products. But for most of you, if you got to grade 6, 7, and 8, you were an adult. You left school, you could read and write, and you would begin working on your family farm. And, well, people after that, you'd get married. It's like my friends who graduated high school and didn't go on to college or university got married earlier because they're ready. They're ready to move into that. Then we added 4 years of high school, my parents' generation. Then my generation added, for the most part, 3 to 4 years of college or university or even apprenticeships on top of that. Now, I see multiple postgraduate degrees. You say, Brett, what does that even mean? If you're in high school, once you graduate, let's say you go and do a 4-year degree at a university. Then you go back and do a master's degree. It's what I'm working on right now myself. A 2-year master's degree, you then graduate. Now you're like late 20s? And then you say, you know what, I'm not happy with that master's degree. I want another master's degree. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to who go back for second degrees. And once again, we wonder why we're getting older and older before we get married. I do want to talk about the confusion between being sexually attracted to someone and loving that person. There's a great quote that says this. It says that there is much confusion between sexual attraction and love. When an individual feels that they are sexually attracted to one another, they therefore feel that they are in love with that person. I always ask the question, which is this: if we eliminated all physical attraction, all physical stuff that you had in your relationship, what do you have left? One girl actually said to me, Brett, we have nothing. That's really all we have in our relationship. To which I would reply, then I don't think you have anything at all. How about in your relationship today? If you took all physical touch away for a month, what would you have left? It's interesting how many people really look at themselves and say, that's such a big part of your relationship. How about this? This is the question that we got to go through. What behavior is appropriate for those of us who are going to practice sexual abstinence before marriage? The question that we've been asking for years is, how far can I go? I'm 15, dating a girl, and the question we're asking is, as Christians, how far can we go? Because no one's actually ever told us. And so I walked into my youth pastor one day. She doesn't want to come. She waits outside. And I said to him, listen, can I talk to you? And it's like, sure. So I'm ushered in. We sit down. And I said, what can I do sexually with? And I told him my girlfriend's name. I've never seen a youth pastor feel so uncomfortable in my whole life. And here's his reply. He says, Brett, it's not how far you should go. It's how close to God you should be. Because he said, Brett, if you go too far away from God, do you know what happens? Like, what happens, Pastor? He says, you burn up. I remember looking at him and I said, you didn't even use the word sex. Like, you didn't even talk to me about that. And that was the end of our conversation. He had said his piece. He didn't really know where to go. And that was it. You know, sex truly is that slide like in Ephesians. It begins with holding hands. Now, let me say this. Holding hands is fine. You might think it's weird I have to say that, but I think I need to, because in some books it says you can't hold hands until you're married. But why do I have to address that? In the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've had multiple conversations with young students. 2 of them were both suicide attempts. One of them went this way. I'm at a large event and a young student walks up. He's in grade 7 and 8. And he is weeping, not talking, weeping. You know, he can't get his breath and these words are coming out of his mouth and he says, sex, girlfriend, parents, beach. I'm like, oh, you got caught having sex with your girlfriend on a beach. And he's like, no. So anyways, calm this guy down. His name's Jeremy. And this is the story. He's on a beach in northern Ontario. If you live in Ontario, it's beautiful in the summertime. There's a full moon out. He's walking along the beach of a beautiful lake, and his girlfriend's parents are behind him holding hands, and his girlfriend reaches down and grabs, and he paused. And I kind of looked at him, he goes, yeah, she grabbed my hand. And I said, yeah? And he said, Brett, I'd read a book that said if you touch a girl before you're married, you're sinning before the God you love. Like, there's things you hear, you don't really know what to say. I leaned forward and he goes, Brett, I had my first suicide attempt the next week. And I didn't even know what to say. And he said, Brett, I had my second suicide attempt last week. And he was up talking to me because he was planning his third suicide attempt. He was willing to take his own life because he had disappointed God. And I said to him, Jeremy, when my daughter's in grade 7 and 8, I hope she's not dating. But if she is, and she's on a beach with me and my wife holding hands, and she grabs your hand, that's okay. I said, I pray for that kind of stuff. That's good. And I watched this young guy's shoulders melt, and I watched him just start to cry. I apologize for the guilt we put on you as a generation. So anyways, holding hands is fine. And then you slide down the slide, right? It goes from holding hands to kissing to really kissing, right? Like kissing goodnight to kissing for 5 minutes. And it goes all the way down that slide to oral sex and then having sex. Now, if we divide into 2 camps, or 2 parts, we have holding hands, which is fine, and we know sex is wrong. The Bible says flee sexual morality. It's the only time I've ever heard in the Bible where it says don't do, right? Flee and run from sexual morality. What's everything else in the middle? Well, first off, let's do a couple of things down near the bottom. Sexual immorality, defined in my mind, is being sexually fulfilled in any way, shape, and form by anybody other than your spouse. So whether you're married or not, you're involved here. That includes oral sex, masturbation. Well, what is everything else? Everything else is a word we don't usually say in church. It's called foreplay. Some people call it outer course. The goal God wants us to be in is, when we are in love and married, is to be able to be sexually together. That's the reality. The problem is that everything else in the middle is foreplay. It's designed to get us ready to have sex. It's the analogy that I always love of the on-ramp. When you drive, you're going to be on a highway, right? You go on an on-ramp to get on the highway. If the highway is sex that God wants you to be in under the covenant of marriage, the on-ramp is what we're playing on. How many of you have ever been driving and you go on the on-ramp and you stop, you pull over, you play around for a bit and then reverse off the on-ramp? The problem is that once you begin down the on-ramp, we like it. We're sexual beings. We get turned on. Song of Solomon says, don't excite love. Don't stir it up until the time is ripe and until you're ready. The problem is we get turned on, and what I hear is people who slide down that slide, and they don't really want to. I hear probably 90% of the time students who say this, Brett, I hit somewhere near the bottom and I regret. You know, I would also say this, I hear stats that say 80% of things that happen in the middle of that slide are done under the influence of alcohol. And I just say for anyone who's in those environments, be very careful. I mean, we know we're not supposed to be drunk, but the reality is people are, and what happens in that comes regret. I find so much regret comes from those party environments and those party atmospheres. You know, I will say this, if we do want to make change, we first off have to make sure we're not going to be in those situations. Guys, don't lie down with your girlfriend in front of you, kind of spooning her, holding on to her, watching a movie. Why? It will turn you on. You know, if the problem is that you're, on a bed together, or if you're alone in a house, or if you're kissing too much, whatever it might be, if that's walking you down that road, then stay away from that. I'd also say this question, what if I messed up already? I hear this quite a lot. Incredible guilt of, Brett, I've already slept with my boyfriend. We've already messed up. And I'd say this, that we have a loving but a forgiving God. And no matter what you've done, no matter what has been involved in your life, you can move forward. You can say, God, I am sorry, forgive me. You can repent and then move forward. And the reality is, for so many of us, we live in this place of guilt. And I'd say you only have two choices. You can spend your life looking at your past, or you can say, I've messed up, and move towards your future. Physical touch does expose your heart and it does cloud the mind. So please take things slowly. One of my favorite pastors is a guy named Mark Driscoll out of a church called Mars Hill down in Seattle. He tells a story about a young woman in his church who walked up to him. She came up to him and said this. She said, Mark, just so you know, I'm dating a non-Christian guy and we're sleeping together and we're going to move in together. And Mark's question to her was, why do you do this? And she responded, he loves me. And Mark's response was then, it's too bad that you've chosen this boy to become your God. I can kind of picture the girl looking at him and saying, my God, no, he's just my boyfriend and we're just doing this. First off, kind of weird to walk up to your pastor and tell him what you're doing. Mark's response was amazing. He said this. He basically said, you know what? There's only really two commandments, and I agree. There's only 1 and 2. If you don't break 1 and 2, you will never break the other 8. A, no gods before me. When God says don't, and your boyfriend or girlfriend says do, who do you listen to? When you listen to, instead of God, your boyfriend or girlfriend, what you do is you leave God being God, and you remove him and place your boyfriend and girlfriend there. Commandment number 2 talks about worship. The book of Romans says to offer yourself as a living sacrifice. When you offer your body as a living sacrifice to your boyfriend and girlfriend sexually, it's called worship. We talk too much about the fruit of sin, which is like sexuality and pornography. We don't ever deal with the root of sin. And I agree with Mark. The root of sin is worship. A, no gods before me. And then B, don't worship that. What we see too often today is the idea of just living together. And I would just say that if you're going to follow down that path, which I see a lot of people doing, just know some of the statistics. And once again, these stats could be a little bit in either direction. First off, half of all the couples who live together will break up within less than 5 years. And they say roughly 60% within 10 years. Only 40% of people who live together will ever even actually get married. And your divorce rate for people who live together is actually 33% higher than those who didn't. Meaning, if your goal is to be that 25% of people that live successful, meaning you're intact and you're happy, and that's your goal, you don't want to live together. Craig Raquel is part of the lifechurch.tv. He's their lead pastor down in the States. And in his book, Going All the Way, he says this. These are wedding vows for a couple who's just going to live together. So kind of not wedding vows, but common law vows. This is it. He says, I, Rick, take you, Monica, to be my cohabitant, to have sex with you and hold you responsible for half the bills, to love and take advantage of you for this day forward, or as long as our arrangement works out. I will be more or less faithful to you as long as my needs are met, if nothing better comes along. If I should break up with you, this doesn't mean this wasn't special to me, because I love you almost as much as I love myself. I commit to live with you for a while, so help me. In the name of sex, options, and selfishness. Amen. I will say this, there's a big precaution. When couples get married, they make a vow to not have sex and other things with other people. What measures will you and your spouse take to avoid this happening? The problem I see right now is I'm watching affairs destroying us as a culture. I've seen affairs all over this country as I travel. And the truth is, we're not taking this seriously. I have some rules in my life. As a traveling speaker, when I fly into an event, I am not allowed to be picked up by a woman. Youth pastor says to me, is it because you struggle with sleeping with the women who pick you up? I'm like, that was the weirdest question I've ever heard, but no, I don't want to though. My door at home, at the back of it says, I will not crash. It says, I will not destroy the name of Christ. I will not destroy my wife, Dawn. I will not destroy my children, Zoe and Ben. I will not crash. And when I walk out every day, being a sports guy, I touch that. It's kind of like when a team leaves the locker room, they touch some motto. My motto is, I'm not going to crash. If I crash my family, I crash the name of Christ, and I crash a lot of the people like you, the audiences who I've had a chance to speak to. What are you putting around your life? What are you doing? What barriers will you put around your life? And the truth is, it's really going back to the beginning of who are you emotionally connected today that you shouldn't be. It's not really who are you sleeping with that you shouldn't. We've already passed those things. I'm saying who are you connected with emotionally that you probably shouldn't be. Just like the questions for money, there's questions on sexuality. Will you get tested for STDs together? STDs, STIs, either one. Will you get tested? The reality today is that CNN says it's 1 in 4 girls today has an STD. 1 in 14 girls. I'm at a talk and I put the stat up at 1 in 14 girls, and a guy in the front row literally out loud says, "Oh, whew." I looked at him, I said, "Dude, what was that for?" And he goes, 1 in 14 girls has an STD. He says, "I'm so glad I'm a guy." I said, "Dude, if 1 in 14 girls has an STD, 1 in 14 guys has an STD." And then this guy got all blood red and got upset. But I'm like, what a weird response. How do you presently feel about sex? Scared, frustrated, ready to go? Inhibitions? Have there ever been any negative sexual experiences in your life? Abuse, rape, former partners? How important is sex on your honeymoon night? Let me just say this. If you are abstaining, if you are not having sex until you're married, honeymoon night will not be the night that so many of us think it will be, because the reality is you both don't know what you're doing. And the truth is, so many couples come home expecting it to be some amazing weekend like the movies, and it turns out to be something different. Can you talk freely about sex with your boyfriend or girlfriend? What do you lack about this conversation on sex? And I'd say, what new questions do you have for your boyfriend and girlfriend? And I'd say this, that we don't dwell on the past mistakes, but we need to, as couples, move forward in this conversation. Things to consider. Religious, your faith background. It's great you found someone who's a Christian. What does that mean? Because Christian means a lot of things to a lot of people. And just because someone says they're a Christian, it could mean that they're a Christian because they're not Muslim, they're not Hindu. But that's really not who I am as a Christian. There's a book called Don't You Dare Get Married Until You Read These 500 Questions. It says here, a spouse that takes anything to a front seat to God or their partner or both only goes part way. But a marriage keeps God, spouse, and self in the right order, goes the distance. Too often I think it's kind of us, God, and spouse, or us, God, and girlfriend. And the problem is that if you're not saying it's God first, them second, and then you're not mature enough to date. It's got to be in that order. Religious questions, simple ones. Will you go to church as a couple? Couples go, sure. And I say, great, which one? My wife and I came from 2 different churches. And this one is one I messed up on. My wife came to my church. I'd been there a lifetime. And I really was there a lifetime because of social reasons. And I was dying in my own faith. And I began to spiritually destroy my wife over a few years until we left and moved to a church we go to now called Crothers Creek in Ajax, where we've been now for about 8 years. How were you brought up? Were you brought up in the church, fringe church, non-practicing Christian? We hear the term non-practicing Catholic a lot. The reality is, even from a Protestant place, we have a non-practicing Christian as well. The idea of you're Christian only by name and you don't live out anything. And fringe church as well. I know many people who go to church at Easter and Christmas and they still would say they're Christian. And I'd say, well, that might be Christian for you, but that's not the kind of person I'm looking for. I'd say, what place does faith play in your life? If I asked you on a scale of 1 to 10, rank what number you are. And people go, okay, I'm an 8. And then I'd ask, does your life actually reflect that? The difference between who you are and who you say you are is called the hypocrisy quotient. It's where we're hypocrites in the middle. What are the differences in your beliefs? I grew up in a Baptist world. I married a Pentecostal. I know that's not supposed to happen, but we got married. We're now associated gospel. I guess that's the merging of those 2 things in the middle. But what are the differences in your beliefs? My wife and I had to talk about some of those things. Are those deal breakers or are they not? How important do you think faith will play in your future, in your marriage? Do you want to have a church wedding? Do you want to have a Christian marriage? Do you even know what a Christian marriage is? Do you think it's important that when you guys have children that you go together to church as a family? Because the reality is many people don't do that today. Do you presently pray for each other? Is your faith dramatically different? No, if your faith is dramatically different, how will you handle this? And I'd look at all those things that could be deal breakers. And lastly, what questions has this discussion on faith brought up for you? Once again, dating grows. Dating is so much bigger than what we think it is. Things to consider. Dating history. This is an interesting one for me. When did you begin dating? I can tell you the stories of my kids beginning dating, and we're talking about when did you really begin dating? At what age were you at? And the big question is, what does dating even mean to you? How about how many people have you seriously dated? This was a weird one for me because my wife and I began to date, and everywhere I went, my wife would say, I dated that guy, I dated this guy, and I kind of one day actually said to myself, my wife's dated everybody, everywhere I went. And then I realized this, what we viewed as dating is different. I had, I think, 4 long-term girlfriends. Other than those, dating to me was something like I dated those girls. Dating to me isn't going out for coffee. My wife, if she went out for coffee with you, she'd say that you dated. And I'm like, it's just a difference in how we view its perspective. How about if you've dated before, why did your relationships fall apart? What was it? What was it that happened? Were you just growing in different ways? What were the strong points in your relationships? What were the weaknesses and conflicts you had in those relationships? What's your relationship now with your past boyfriends and girlfriends? And let me pause just for 1 sec here. The past boyfriends and girlfriends is a big issue. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this kind of thing. It was a number of years ago, and a friend of mine at church walked up and he said to me, Brett, did you hear about, and he named me one of my old girlfriends. And I said, no. He looked really serious. And I said, like, what's the problem? And he kind of had this weird smile. And he said, she got divorced. I'm going to be real honest. My fist clenched, and it was all I could not do to lay this guy out in the ground. I am married to my wife, Dawn. I love her. But other than my wife, my mom, and my sister, the closest women I've ever had in my life are my ex-girlfriends. I don't hang out with them. We're not friends right now. We don't go out together as couples. But do I wish them harm? No. I wish them long lives. I wish them good marriages. I hope they find a great guy who treats them really well. I don't ever wish them harm, and I think it's just evil. I'd even say demonic when we start to look and find that funny when someone gets hurt, especially in the church. And I challenge you of how we talk about our ex-boyfriends and girlfriends. How about the question, is there anything in your past I should be aware of? Now, please, this is not a question for date 5, right? You're not at Tim Hortons and that's it. This needs to be something that is asked over, I'd say maybe not even beginning till date, like maybe month 9, 10, or 11 or beyond. How about the big question again? What questions is this discussion brought up for you on dating? What do you have that you need to talk about now? Things to consider. Family background. I think the hardest question, but one of the biggest ones we got to address is this. Was your family ever divorced, separated, or widowed? Why? Well, statistics say this. If you come from a divorced background, you are more likely to get divorced. And usually I watch heads go down as half the room realizes that, well, I guess their marriages will never work. Here's the problem with this. We don't finish off that sentence, which says you're more likely to get divorced unless you own it. This idea that you follow down some path of what your mom or dad did is just not true. For some of you, I dare you to be your mom or dad. For some of you, your mom or dad are mentors in your life, and you can look at them as individuals or a marriage and say, this is what I want to be. For some of you, I dare you to be different than your mom or dad. You do not follow a path of abuse. You do not follow a path of alcohol, of drugs, of neglect, of whatever. It is your life. You can be and do anything you want. Some people I know were beaten to a pulp by drunk fathers, and they've grown up to be some of the best fathers I've ever known in my life. You don't follow the path of your parents. And for some of you, you need to realize you have a freedom. You have permission to go and be anything, but acknowledge where you've come from. Acknowledge your past. Another one, how was your parents' marriage? Was it happy, rocky, or abusive? How has this affected your view of marriage? For some of you, when you get engaged, or even as a teen, you need to adopt a family in your church that you're going to look towards. Because maybe in your family at home, when your mom dropped a plate of spaghetti, she was told to F off and was, hit or slapped. That's not okay. But if that's what you've grown up with, you might think that that's normal. It's not. You might need to adopt another couple, and whether it's at church or out for lunch once every few weeks or in their house, whatever, just watch a normal marriage. Watch the dynamic and watch what happens so that you don't follow down the same paths. What are your parents' opinions on who you're dating? If your parents were the people you trusted before you began to date, then when you start dating, still trust what they say. They'll be the people who will be there after you break up so often. How about what are family traditions that might affect your relationship later in life? Now, these aren't deal breakers to me for the most part. I wonder how many of you watch National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation every Christmas, like I do. I couldn't stand to do that. But for some of you, you might need to know that that's what you're getting into. For some of you, you might need to know that you're marrying into a cottage family, which means every weekend for 4 or 5 months a year, you're fighting cottage traffic to go up north. For some of you, it might mean that you married someone whose family lives far away, and it's going to mean every summer you're traveling to Chicago or New York or wherever to go see another family. How do you feel presently about your boyfriend or girlfriend's family? Do you feel accepted, cold, or loving? And I will say this isn't a deal breaker. You're marrying your wife or you're marrying your husband. Well, at that point, your boyfriend or girlfriend. But those are good things to talk about. What questions has this discussion on family background brought up for you? Dating grows. Hopefully you're getting this. Like, dating is so much bigger sometimes than what we think it is. Things to consider. Kids. Now, I'm going to be honest, nothing in your entire life will have a greater impact on you than having children. And for some of you, you're in grade 7 or 11 and you're going, Brett, I'm not even dating. What do you mean, kids? I just ask you to listen for the 2 minutes here and to put this in the back of your head. First question you got to ask as a couple is, do you want any? Now, let me just make sure you don't phrase this wrong. I'm not saying go to who you're dating with tonight and say, do you want to make babies with me? Okay, that's a very different question than what I'm saying. The question is, one day in life, do you want to have kids? I'm watching couples get divorced now because they got engaged, they've gotten married, and they're in the relationship, and then one day the woman or someone says, I want to have a child, and the other person goes, I don't want kids. Now, what I see very often here is this: a guy who doesn't want kids and a woman who's willing to overlook that to get married, thinking that one day in the relationship, he'll change. And 5 years into the relationship, she wants a child, and the guy says, I've never wanted kids. And I watch these wonderful couples split up. And I watch a good marriage that I thought was happy and intact deteriorate because one question wasn't asked. So the question of, do you want kids, is paramount. And then the second question is this: how many do you want? Do you want one kid? Do you want 4 kids or 5 kids? I put this last picture up and someone yelled out from the back, they called it crazy stupid family. Like, do you want 17 kids? Like, if you want your own television show, your wife or husband needs to know that. I'm at a talk and a guy and girl are at the back, and I put up this picture of all these kids, this big family, and the guy says, yes. And I watched the girl do one of these slow turns over to him. Like, dude, have you told her you want 17 kids? My wife and I disagreed on children. I wanted 3, she wanted 2, which is weird because I come from a family of 2, she comes from a family of 3. But you know what? 3 and 2 is something we could work out. We had our first child, my daughter Zoe, and Zoe didn't sleep through the night till she was 2.5 years old. And it destroyed my wife and I for 2 years. My wife, I think, a lot worse than me. It was brutal. When you don't sleep through the night for ongoing amounts of months and years, it's brutal. And you know what? I changed from 3 kids to 2 kids. I'm quite happy with 2 children. But if you want 1 and they want 8, I don't know if that's going to work. How about we go over the questions, the big questions? I mean, there's lots of them. First off, we just did the first one. Do you even want kids? How about the second one? How long will you wait? My wife and I met and married very quick. When you are meeting each other and growing your relationship, it goes like this. When you have children, it will plateau. My wife and I, it just dropped. We waited 5 years. For us, we had 5 years of getting to know each other and hanging out together and just building up our relationship. The question we addressed back with money: will someone stay home with the kids or will they be raised in daycare? And if someone stays home, who will do that? And in our relationship, my wife and I work from home, so we've kind of rebalanced that. And my wife works half-time, and I'm home a bit and she's home a bit. Another question I just want you to put in the back of your head: what if you want kids but are unable to? My generation, it's an easy question. How many kids do you have? Everyone just asks that and everyone will give you an answer. The problem we have today is that there are many people who are unable to have kids. I don't know why. I don't know if it's water or plastics or I don't know what it is, but I know in my own circle of friends and family, at least I think 12 couples who can't have kids. And it's some of the hardest stuff I've ever watched people go through in my life. And the question that comes after if you can't have kids are questions like, how do you feel about adoption? Medical testing, in vitro fertilization, and even just the testing to see why you can't have kids has just been some of the most, rough times I've seen in some of my friends' lives. But here's an easy question. If you can't have kids, are you willing to adopt? I've seen good couples who are together in great marriages and they can't have children. And what happens is one says, I'm willing to adopt, and one says, no, blood only. And I watch another couple split apart. And I look and say, that could have been dealt with over a coffee. One conversation could have saved that marriage. Guys, how much should the guy be involved in raising children? And guys, I'd say this, as much as your wife. And I know that my generation of fathers, and especially a lot of the generation above me, we have not been the fathers and mentors that you've needed. But the truth is that that's not okay. And we desperately need a new generation of guy, a new generation of man who stands up and is a father. I tell guys all the time, if you're not reading stories to your kids, you're not a dad. I know women who can't go out at night because they won't let you as a dad put your own children down. And you guys as a generation coming up need to be different. What kind of home do you want your kids growing up in? This is the one I see where the practical conversation on media kind of hits the road. Meaning what? I've been talking about Grand Theft Auto, GTA now for a decade. I'm so sick and tired of talking about the game. But I've often talked about how it's a game where I can have sex with a prostitute and then, kill her afterwards. And a guy wrote me a number of months ago. It's actually my 4th or 5th letter, all the same. It's this. You and I, and they're writing me, they say, Brett, you and I have been debating GTA for years. And they all went this way. Brett, I got a 2-year-old son now, and I was playing GTA. I was having sex with the prostitute, and I look to my side, and there's my 2-year-old son watching. And I hear this, I finally get it. Thanks. What kind of home do you want your kids growing up in? And the big one, what questions is this discussion on children brought up for you? Dating grows. Things to consider. Professional goals. Professional goals are you, right? What are the things about you? Here are the big questions, right? Who will you marry? What will you do for work? Realize what you do for work affects the person. It affects the person you're going to date, and it affects you. Finding out what you want to do for work is a big thing because it affects the other person. And for you, you have to ask this of the other person. What will they be doing for work? I know a lot of friends who marry people, and then they're upset at what they're doing for work. I know one girl who married an international banker. And she's upset now because they live overseas somewhere, and she's depressed because she wants to live at home. It's kind of like, honey, you married an international banker. You didn't marry someone who works at a local bank, like a teller. Across the board, most pastors that are youth pastors in Canada are men. I know we have some wonderful women, but across the board, it's mostly men. And I'd say I know a lot of pastors' wives who are depressed across Canada and the U.S. Because if you're going to marry a youth pastor, ladies, you will not live in your town your whole life. Pastors stay at a church for, I don't know why it's so short of 2 years, 3 years, but we stay in churches for X amount of time and then we move. And I know people who've moved from where I live to Vancouver or from Saskatchewan to Newfoundland, and suddenly you're in a place without family and friends. And some people, they find that really hard. And I'd say, who you marry will affect you the rest of your life. How about the question, where will you live? I'll never forget, I'm on a first date with someone. I'm walking on the driveway, and she turns and says a line of, you know what, Brett, when I get older and get married, I just can't wait to just pack up and move to British Columbia. I put her in her car, and put her in my car, and I walked around the car, and I got in, and I said to her, you know what, this is never going to work. I want to stay. I like where I live. I love roots. Now, what do I mean by that? I've grown up in a town called Ajax. I was born and raised till I was in grade 8 in Ajax. And when I was in grade 8, I moved to the other side of Ajax. When I was 26, my wife and I got married, and we moved to Pickering. Pickering is right beside Ajax. We lived there for almost 10 years, and we wanted to be in a house we could stay in forever for my kids. And so we moved, if you can believe it, to Ajax. My kids will go to my high school, and I like that. I like roots. I like where I am. And you know what? I don't really care what you want to do. You need to find someone who will be with you that will agree with you. My wife and I are in agreement. That's all that matters. You need to find someone who, if they want to move to BC and so do you, that's great. What questions has this brought up for you about professional goals? Dating grows. Things to consider. Personal growth. The idea of just because you're dating doesn't mean you die. What books, magazines have you read lately for fun? Those things that make you you. What are your weaknesses in life? How are you managing your weaknesses? And remember, manage your weaknesses. But I would challenge you to ask this: what are your strengths in life? And work on those areas. If you put 10 rungs, 1 to 10, you can put anything you do in life onto those 10 rungs. And if you work your whole life, you can go up 2 levels. So usually what we do is, because we're kind of a weakness-based society, is we work on weaknesses. If I'm a 3 in language and I work my whole life, I can become a 5. Who cares? I go from being pathetic to being sort of pathetic. If you're an 8, though, and you work at something, you become a 9 or you become a 10. People line up to see 9s and 10s. Those are the best musicians and architects and sports athletes in the world. So what are your strengths, and work on those? I'd say, what courses or seminars have you attended last year? Every year in my life, I go to what's called the Leadership Summit. It's a yearly spiritual retreat. I've done it every year for a decade. But what do you do? How about this? Is there anything that you gave up once you started dating that was really a big part of your life before? Why'd you give it up? Sometimes we give up those major things in our life, and then we begin to not only resent, but we begin to not be who we are. What questions has this discussion on personal growth brought up for you? We need to walk through these things. Dating grows. Things to consider: personal health. These are the simple questions. What are your thoughts on each other's, your boyfriend's or girlfriend's, personal health? What are your thoughts on your personal health? Something we should always look at as well. What first attracted you to each other? Is it still evident in their life? Do you exercise regularly together? My wife and I don't do together. She goes to Zumba or some weird kind of dance aerobics, and I do exercises at home on DVD. What turns you off sexually about the other person? How do you feel about drinking? These are big in the church. How do you feel about smoking? Honestly, I would die if I married someone who smoked. And I'm serious, I have asthma. I'd literally die. I'm not able to be in the same room with a smoker. What's interesting though is we have this problem of we don't realize who we date will probably marry. It happens all the time. I hear people all the time saying, Brett, my house smells like smoke. And I'm like, you married a smoker. He's always smoked. It's the things that these people have done. One guy I know married a girl who wore the cleavage-showing belly shirts, short skirts, that kind of girl. And now he's upset because now 10 years later, she's wearing those same kinds of clothing to parent council at school. And he's upset at that. And I'm like, dude, that's the girl you married. That's who you loved. The one that bothers me the most, ladies, is you who marry the party guy. Yeah, he's the funniest guy right now in high school or in university or college. He's the life of the party. He drinks more beer than anyone else. Here's the problem. You add 5 years to your life. No longer is he the life of the party. Now he's passed out after he's puked in the toilet, and your 2-year-old sitting on his chest. Now we call him the drunk. Who you date, you're probably going to marry. And for some reason, we have a massive disconnect with that. Is there anything in your life you can see that might be an issue as you guys get older? When you have kids? What other questions has this brought up for you? And lastly, and let's just blast through these, would be chores. The idea of if you're living at home with an enabling mom who does all this for you, you're not really ready to get married anyways. Because who will wash the dishes? You will have to wash dishes. You will have to clean the bathroom. You will have to vacuum. You will clean your car. You will do the garbage. You will make the bed. Welcome to the fabulous world of dating. So where do we go from here? Well, if you want the best statistic in the world for dating, you need to have an arranged marriage. Now, the truth is, most of you don't want that. If you do, we can set it up with parents and pass some cattle back and forth like it was always done, but you don't want that. The truth is, what we always hear is this thing called courtship, which in the 1900s was me giving presents to my girlfriend's mom, because if she liked me, I could therefore date the daughter, which is not something we do. We have regular dating, which is a test drive of everything in life. Everything. And the problem with that is the average college date, they say now is date 5 when you sleep together. Is that what dating means to you? And lastly, we have, I don't like the term Christian dating or dating redeemed, but call it whatever. We do life differently as Christians. So I'm going to tell you what dating is not to begin. First off, dating is not abuse. If you follow media, you know that Rihanna was beaten by Chris Brown many years ago, probably 2 years ago now. In a recent poll, they say 47% of teenagers say that she deserved it. What kind of stupid world do we live in when anyone thinks that a woman deserves to be beaten up? A girl put up her hand at one of my talks. I'm at a Catholic school. She said, Brett, but what if she cheated on him? First off, what her premise is that, Brett, if Rihanna cheated on Chris therefore was able to punch, kick, and bite her. Ladies, there's nothing you could ever do in life, ever. If you cheat on someone, the answer is break up with them. There's nothing you could ever do in life that should make a guy ever touch you or even intimidate you. I'm 6'6". I can walk in a room and intimidate you just by size. There's nothing you could do or say that should make a guy touch you. And guys, let me just say this. Violence is selective. This idea of your background or your history, you didn't have a father. I know those are tough things, but it's an excuse when you talk about touching a woman, because you don't touch your coach, you don't punch your best friends, you don't punch your teacher, you don't punch any of those people, but yet your girlfriend. Why? Because they're usually twice the size, and we know we can. I'd say that's a problem, that's selective, and we need to, as men, deal with those things in our own lives. This is dating today. Dating is verbal abuse. Statistically, it's 1 in 3 relationships. By the way, guys, just to be real, this is almost across the board, men against women. This is people being called stupid, worthless, ugly, fat, every swear word in the book. And I'd say, guys, the answer to this isn't calling our women that. It's building up their hearts instead of tearing them down. You know, we now have people who act jealous or possessive in relationships. It says 1 in 4 relationships. And I'd say we need to change. Guys, the way to make her heart turn towards you is not by force. It's freedom. It's allowing her to turn back to you. That's love. We have relationships where, guys, we criticize or put down the women we love. And I'd say our goal is to walk the journey together as a couple. You know, the one that bugs me a lot is this idea of control. Controlling where they go, what your girlfriend wears. Like, that's a weird one. You know, I'd say, guys, we need to accept our girls and the women we love the way they are, not the way you want her to be. How about people who text or instant message you excessively? I know one girl who was texted 55 times during my talk. And I'd say, guys, this is about trust. If she wants to be with another guy, she will be with another guy. If she's with you, she's choosing to be with you. Trust her. How about and by the way, that's 1 in 3 relationships today. 1 in 3, it just blows my mind. You know, these all concern me, but guys, how about those of us who threaten to hurt ourselves or the women we love if they're gonna leave us? I mean, guys, this is 1 in 5 teenage girls say this is normal in relationships today. We must take responsibility for our own brokenness. I don't know what it is that's making us say those things, but we must take responsibility. And we must take responsibility for beginning our own healing as well. How about those of us who stop the women we love from seeing friends and family? Guys, we must realize that women live in community. When I have a night off, I want to go home and watch television. I want to be on my own, maybe with my wife. That's what I want. When my wife Dawn has a night off, she wants to be in community. Guys, we are natural loners. We know we need to be more in community, but we need to let our wives flourish in the community that they have. You know, how about guys who try to force or guilt you into sexual activity of some sort? They say it's 1 in 4 teen girls who say this. And I'd say, guys, be a different fish. You don't have to follow down that same path, and women will respect you for being different. And I think the biggest one is this. Women who are physically hit, slapped, choked, kicked, pushed, beaten to a pulp. And I'd say again, guys, we have a funny way of showing love. This isn't love. This is not love in any way, shape, and form. And it's 1 in 5 relationships. And I say again, we need therapy. We need to begin to deal with the reasons we're doing that. So if you're sitting here going, am I in a bad relationship? How do I get out? Well, first off, look through the talk we did today. Are there deal breakers? Are there things you're like, you know what, you want 8 kids, I want 1. That's a deal breaker. That means you can be friends, but it's not going to work. The other question is, can it be saved? Please don't. I had a girl once and she wrote me and said, Brett, my boyfriend wants to spend all his time with me and he's abusive, therefore, I guess. And she said, after your talk, I think now it's an abusive relationship and we need to break up. And I said, honey, wait a sec. Maybe he just really loves you. I said, maybe he just really wants to be with you. I said, before you break up, just have a quick conversation. She writes me back a few hours later. She said, Brett, so I called him and I told him what I said to you. And he said, oh, listen, I've never had a girlfriend. I just assumed we're supposed to be together every day. And he said, I'd love some time to hang out with my guy friends as well. And she's like, wow, it just was a conversation. I just didn't realize it. For all other things, guys and girls, you can set boundaries. You can sit and talk and work these things out and see if you're right together or if you're not. You know, I would say this. There's an amazing video by a group called loveisrespect.org. And I'd love you to take some time and to walk through this video. It's basically the dating bill of rights. Have a listen to this and we'll come and talk back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm 17 Editor-in-Chief Anne Choquette. 1 in 5 teens who've been in a serious relationship report being hit, slapped, or pushed by their boyfriend or girlfriend. When you're aware of dating abuse, you can be more confident in your decisions. In every relationship, you have rights. Be aware of dating abuse. Be confident in your decisions. Watch, learn, and tell a friend.
I have the right to always be treated with respect.
I have the right to be in a healthy relationship.
I have the right to not be hurt physically or emotionally.
I have the right to refuse sex or affection at any time.
I have the right to have friends or activities apart from my girlfriend.
I have the right to end a relationship.
I pledge to always treat my girlfriend with respect.
I pledge to never hurt my partner physically, verbally, or emotionally.
I pledge to not be controlling or manipulative in my relationship.
I pledge to take responsibility for myself and my actions.
Abuse is never deserved and it's never your fault. Be confident, aware, and remember, love is respect.
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 Please visit loveisrespect.org to sign the Digital Dating Bill of Rights.
Make your own statement about teen dating abuse.
I think any couple who is old enough to date and is mature enough to date can agree to all those things. Let me just say some of these again. Dating Bill of Rights. I have the right. I have the right to always be treated with respect. I have the right to be in a healthy relationship. I have the right not to be hurt physically or emotionally. I have the right to refuse sex or affection at any time. I have the right to not have sex. I have the right to have friends and activities apart from my boyfriend or girlfriend. And lastly, I have the right to end a relationship at any time. And then you also have to pledge. You pledge these things. I pledge to always treat my boyfriend or girlfriend with respect. I pledge to never hurt my boyfriend or girlfriend physically, verbally, or emotionally. I pledge to respect my girlfriend or boyfriend's decisions concerning sex and affection. I pledge not to be controlling and manipulative in my relationship, and I accept my own responsibilities for my actions. The problem today is we have an entire new online community of teen dating abuse websites. There are lists and lists of them, and you can go to loveisrespect.org and find these things. So what is dating? I have no idea. The idea that we can package dating into 4 C's, I respect my audience is way too much for that. Dating is a million questions. Dating is spending the time. I think the reality is we know what it should be. 1 Corinthians 13. I love how it's said, though, in the Message. It says, love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self, and love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. It doesn't have a swelled head. It doesn't force itself on others, and it isn't always me first. It doesn't fly off the handle, and it doesn't keep the score of the sins of others. It doesn't revel when others grovel. It takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. It puts up with anything. It trusts God always. Always looks for the best. It never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. I'd say this, slow down. We so quickly in our relationships today give away our hearts, our bodies, our minds, and our souls, the people we barely know. Slow down. Who are the eyes and ears in your life? Who are the friends and family around you trust? Listen to what they say. Ask for their counsel and ask them their opinions. Sex. Anybody can do it. You're not just anybody. We were bought at a very high price as a Christian. I'd say don't over-spiritualize. Play the God card. You know, I was once out on a date with a girl, and second date, she baked me cookies and told me that I'm the one. I kept the cookies and then broke up with her. I mean, just the idea of the second date, it was just too much. The God card. I was the one, though, because God said I was the one to her. Craig Raquel from Life Church, in his book, Going All the Way, says this, a story. A girl had written him a letter. She said, Craig, after our brief conversation at lunch, I prayed for 2 hours about you. While I was praying, my favorite bird, a bluebird, landed on the windowsill. God was showing me that we're supposed to get married. I know God will confirm it in your heart too. Please let me know how we proceed from here. Craig immediately wrote back, Dear bluebird girl, shoot the bird. The idea of, I prayed and God sent a bird, these ideas are just crazy. God wants the best for you. He wants you to choose the right person, but it's up to you. God is not a formula. I don't know why some people are better fits than others. but they are. I don't know why some personalities are better fits and a better compatibility kind of thing for you, but they are. You need to continue through these conversations and see who fits well together. How many of you have seen couples who fight all the time and they're 15? How on earth will that ever make it through to being 50? You know, I'd say too, dating is not a conquest. I hear this so often, that a woman has said, this is what I will do in my relationship, and every time you're together, that line is pushed by her boyfriend. You know, first you hold hands, then you kiss, then you really kiss, then the hands start moving, and it's just this conquest of every day pushing the limits. And I'd say, ladies, if that's your boyfriend, dump his butt. And I'd say, gentlemen, grow up. We desperately need a new generation of men who will actually respect the women that we love. This is the largest job interview that you will ever do in your life. If you can't see yourself with them 1, 3, or 5 years down the road, it's not worth it now. I don't know why some people meet when they're young and some people meet when they're older. I met my wife when I was 26. That was tough. It was tough being a 20-something in the church and being single and trying to find that person. But I'd say it was the best thing I ever did in my life. I know that as a follower of the way, as a Christian, I know in Canada they say that 67% of Canadians attend church once a year. Well, you know what? I don't care if you go once a year. They say 20 attend church weekly. So first you got to find those people. Then after you find them, you got to ask all these questions. Once again, not on the first date. Then you got to actually like them. Then you got to wait for the tingles to wear off. And let me just go through the tingles. The tingles are those feelings you get when they walk in the room. I've been married for 13 years. When my wife Dawn walks in the room, I don't have any tingles. And before someone says, aw, let me just say this. I have an incredibly deep love for my wife that trumps any stupid tingles. Tingles are cheap and tingles fade. You need to let the tingles wear off and make sure that you have something that can last. I'd say to them, make sure that they actually like you back, right? You're not the stalker. You actually are a boyfriend or girlfriend in love. Darren DeGraff's a friend of mine. He works for the Arrow Leadership Program out in BC, and he says this: every marriage will redirect our focus. It must. It has to. It is healthy. But if we have a clear calling and desire to live out that calling, then the primary relationship in our lives should be a major consideration in light of that calling. You know, I say this in all my talks, that you need to figure out, who are you? What are your natural talents and abilities woven together with your spiritual gifts that make you you? You need to figure out what that is. Figure out who you are in that. And then I leave you with a very simple line. What is your plan in dating? You know, is it that road leading off to the distance, or is it that road right now leading to that tornado? There are no easy answers in this. This will take time and work and prayer. But if you can put your time and money into sports and into all those other things we like, you can also put it into this. Give it thought. Give it time. I pray that you actually do find this person one day, that you walk through these questions together, and that you do continue to pursue each other as you do when you date, while you're actually married. By the way, the questions and the communication never stop. It will always be part of you, and it will always be part of your relationship. My prayer for you is simple. My prayer for you is to not only be part of that 25%, but to begin a whole new generation where more than 25% of people have intact and successful marriages. If you have any questions at all, my email is going to be at the end. You can also just find me at brettallman.com. That's BRETTULLMAN.com. Thank you so much for joining me, and hope to talk to you soon. Good night.